I want to pose this question to you. Have you worked with a client who seems fixated on an ex after a breakup? Have you worked with someone who just is in so much pain and they're stuck? They keep thinking about and talking about a lover, but try to picture someone where you know they really fell head over heels for someone. And after a breakup, they just can't seem to get over it. Okay. And when I usually ask people this question in mental health sectors, pretty much over 95% will say yes. That if you've worked with clients, it's very common for us to have worked with someone who just absolutely seems stuck on a former lover. And now I'm going to pose the next question, which is a little bit trickier. If you have you ever conceptualized it as an addiction to their lover? Have you ever thought them as being addicted to them, as if it's really a behavioral addiction? Oh, good. I see some yeses. I see some thumbs up as well. Yes, it is common for batterers. Yes, the highs and lows, a couple of no's. Wonderful, you guys. So oftentimes when I speak to mental health professionals in these kind of professional meetings, and I offer these two questions, the large majority will say, yes, I've worked with people who seem stuck on a lover. But I would say that there's a lot of mixed response to whether they've ever thought of it as an addictive process. Some people would say, yes, I've thought of it in some ways, but not in a very conceptual way or not in a very strategic or systematic approach. Some people will say, no, like really never occurred to me that love could be addictive. And other people really have tried to integrate it into their practice. And so what I really hope for us today is that for any of you who haven't integrated, or even if you have integrated, that this will give us all a different conceptual framework for how you can think about love as a romantic process, and then what you can do with that information in the therapy room with people that you're treating. So what is addiction? Although it's a word we've used in mainstream discourse for years, its conceptualization has actually been widely debated in the mental health field. The most recent definition from the American Society of Addiction Medicine, which came out in 2019, is this: addiction is a treatable, chronic medical disease involving complex interactions of brain circuits, genetics, the environment, and life experiences. I'm going to go through that one more time because it's a bit of a mouthful. It's treatable, but it's chronic. Oftentimes, it's something that someone will struggle with over a lifetime or over an extended period of time. It's a medical disease as they conceptualize it, meaning it has origins in brain chemistry. And it involves a complex interactions of what's going on in your brain, your genetic makeup, so what you're bringing to the table, particularly if you have a family history of addiction in it or addictive behavior. It could be, it could be related to substances, but it also could be related to behaviors. The environment, so your experiences, your cultural makeup, your socioeconomic and demographic makeup, where you grew up, and life experiences, particularly around your parents, your family of origin, your early dating experiences. When it comes to love, those are incredibly important. And in this definition, they go on to say people with addiction use substances or engage in behaviors that become compulsive and often continue despite harmful consequences. And this is really, really important to note about the new definition of addiction, because it's really the first time that they explicitly mention behavior as part of the definition of addiction, that you can struggle with an addiction now purely based on your behavior, not just in response to the ingestion of a substance. And the reason that behavior was added as an addictive process is that there has been an emerging body of research looking at overlap in behaviors that look addictive and in substance use and abuse, such that They overlap in terms of their clinical expression. So, what your patients will say to you when they come into your office, in their brain origins, in the regions of the brain that are implicated in the addiction itself, in the comorbidity. In general, behavioral addictions and substance use disorders are incredibly highly comorbid. Physiology, so what we see that is going on in your body and brain when you're using and around the use of an addictive stimulus, and in treatment, how you treat it and how you think about treatment. And so, although the term addiction is strongly associated with drugs and alcohol historically, our conceptualization of addiction is really shifting. And this is reflected in some degree in the most recent DSM, the DSM-5 that came out in 2013, where for the first time ever, the word addiction and addictive is used as a diagnostic label. And this appears in the new category called substance-related and other addictive disorders. It's in the same chapter as all of the substance use disorders, like alcohol, cannabis, stimulus, opioids, all of them. And currently, there is only one behavioral addiction diagnosis, which is gambling disorder. It is quite possible that had this been a diagnosis in 2006, when I met the gentleman I described in the beginning of this talk, he would have qualified for this, and there would have been a mechanism for us to understand his behavior and to diagnose it and get him some help. But this is really a new diagnostic shift, actually, for us in the mental health world. In addition, there's a category of internet gaming disorder in the DSM-5, which is in section 3 as an area of further study. So it's a condition for further study. It isn't currently a diagnosis, but the DSM task force recognized that there is also a large body of research looking at gaming behavior, online gaming, enough to suggest that we need more research to see if it will meet the next revision of the DSM criteria as an actual mental health diagnosis. So, what makes a behavior addictive? Not everyone who uses drugs and alcohol will become addicted in a pathological way. We all know that. So, what makes something an addiction versus just a fun pastime or something that people use as part of their lifestyle that isn't really problematic? As originally proposed by Mark Griffiths in 2005, there are 6 primary components of addiction. And these are really, really helpful, I find, in helping us conceptualize whether something is an addictive process for somebody. And this is also independent from the type of addictive stimulus. So whether you're using tobacco or cocaine or gambling, these are 6 criteria that he would argue you must have for something to be considered a pathological addiction, something that we would diagnose as a mental health concern related to addiction. The first is salience. The addictive stimulus has salience, which basically means it becomes the most important thing in a person's life. When we're addicted to something, it consumes our time, our energy, our attention at the expense of almost everything else. And so for something to be an addictive stimulus, it has to have that essence where someone's life starts to revolve around the stimulus at the expense of almost everything else. Second, it modifies mood. So a person's emotional state is strongly affected by the addictive stimulus, the use of it, the non-use of it, the planning for use of it. When we think about addictive behavior, people generally start to use substances and engage in an addictive behavior because it feels good or it keeps them from feeling bad. So oftentimes when we talk to people who are struggling with a drug addiction, they start using because they wanted something that feels really good, but they end up using because they don't want to feel bad. For some reason, my slides are going too fast now. But so when you think about modification of mood, remember that it's either oftentimes to feel good or to not feel bad. And in the end, oftentimes it's not associated with any pleasure at all. It ends up being more of a compulsion that generally is to numb or to avoid any emotional experiences or to avoid the badness that they feel when they're not using. The third primary component is tolerance. Essentially, people need increased amounts or a greater frequency of use to get that mood modification quality. So, when it comes to behaviors, this is often spending more time gambling on the addictive stimulus or thinking about your lover or getting online and using pornography. It also could be using it with greater frequency, where it starts one day a week and then eventually it's every day. It could be more hours of the day are spent using the addictive stimulus. The fourth major component is withdrawal symptoms. When you're not using the addictive stimulus, you have unpleasant symptoms. Physical symptoms, physiological symptoms, it could be emotional symptoms or mood-based symptoms. And so, in general, it's this negative feeling, negative thought, negative experience when you're not using. Fifth, conflict. And this is perhaps the most important part of thinking about whether something's addictive or not in a pathological way, in a diagnostic way, is does it have negative consequences to a person's life? So, for something to be considered a mental health issue, it actually has to have negative consequences. It could be in their relationships, it could be in a work setting, it could be inability to focus, it could be health related or legal problems, but there has to be some conflict that is emerging because of this pathological fixation on the addictive stimulus. And finally, sixth, relapse. Attempts to stop using the addictive stimulus are met with future use. That as much as someone may want to stop gambling or stop using porn or stop loving their lover, they can't. And so when they try to stop using the addictive stimulus, they go back. And according to Griffiths, if you think about these 6 components, you have to meet all of them to be considered addicted to something.